I'm going to talk a little bit about SD-WAN, as has been signposted a little bit already during this session. I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about the second title you can see there on the slide. So I have a day job as a Director of Product Management in Amdocs Open Networking, but I guess I have a night job, if that's my day job, of MEF Applications Committee Co-Chair. Now this is a new committee which was announced in November and kind of really formed in our Singapore meeting in January. And it's been formed to kind of take on two pieces of work initially, but kind of will then expand as we go to add other application work as we take it on within MEF, as Pascal kind of signposted. So one of the things which we have under our control at the moment is intent. So kind of a big hot topic, and that's kind of still finding its feet a little bit within MEF, and maybe it's kind of the reason why we're not talking about it today. But the other thing we have, which is pretty fully formed, we wrote a white paper on it last year when it came out at kind of the turn of the year. And if you go to the MEF website, you can download it, and actually you can play bingo as I go through the slides if you want, as part of an exercise for you, and see everything on the slides that's in the white paper, hopefully with a little bit more insight. But that does a really good job of explaining the start point for the work that we're going to do in the application committee on SD-WAN, and kind of drives some of the motivation for it. So we're going to go through a few things today because we need to, I think, almost kind of level set on what SD-WAN means within the industry. So we need to get through kind of what are the key concepts of SD-WAN. What do SD-WAN services look like? If you're a customer, what would you expect when you order an SD-WAN service? And then see kind of how it fits within the LSO reference architecture, so we can hopefully show that it is a good fit to what we've been doing in the background. And then finally to kind of look at some certainly initial candidate use cases, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, but it's again, you have to start somewhere when you're defining these services. So let's take a look at the key concepts. And when I read the slide first, I was going to ask this rhetorically, but as you've got an audience and you all look half asleep, I'm going to ask you the questions yourselves. So, who thinks SD-WAN services will cannibalize MPLS VPN services? Okay, so there's a few hands, and I think I would maybe broadly agree. I think it depends whether you are a big MPLS VPN operator yourself or not, as to whether you see that as being a real problem. But I think it certainly has the ability to put VPN networks where perhaps previously they weren't able to be put. So I think, yes, that's probably a yes. Is it possible to deliver a good SLA using an OTT SD-WAN service? Who thinks it is? So I saw one hand move there. That was not resounding yes. I think the answer is it depends what that SLA is. So if you're saying, can I deliver lightning fast information to a delay sensitive, maybe a real-time banking firm or something like that, maybe you're going to struggle over the public internet. But if you're looking at, can I deliver bulk data reliably and without that kind of sensitivity, maybe jitter or outright time it takes to deliver, you can do a lot of stuff in SD-WAN which will actually make that doable. So I think the answer again is kind of, maybe it depends, maybe not a definite yes or no there. Can SD-WAN services bring new sites up in minutes instead of weeks? Who thinks they can? Again, I think the answer is, it sort of depends on what your start point is for when you're delivering that service. So if you have the infrastructure and your SD-WAN service is based off of virtual network functions, then yeah, it's probably possible to download those and have them up and configured in minutes. But you're certainly looking at a shorter lead time if you're using internet connections or existing connectivity for an SD-WAN service than you are to put carrier Ethernet to a customer site. I know from working with a bunch of customers, it takes a long time, and it's a constant headache. How do we reduce that time down? How do we get it as short as we can? If you can take that time to having at least an initial level of service, be the time it takes to courier a box to a site and then configure it remotely, then that's much better than it is waiting for the 2 or 3 weeks for the big tier 1 machine to turn and churn and deliver you fiber to your street or wherever it's going to get to. So I think, again, to get up and running, it's possible to do it quickly. Maybe to deliver those outright high quality of services, maybe it's a bit more variable. can SD-WAN services connect off-net sites without peering agreements? Who thinks they can? Okay. I think the people who are writing the specs now would tend to agree with the people who put their hands up that yes, that is possible. And certainly it's something we're looking to address in the work that we're doing is to be able to achieve that kind of a service. So then finally, the big question at the top, is it a threat or an opportunity for service providers? And I guess there's no real kind of yes/no answer to this, but I think you can just think about where you would see yourself on that diagram. This diagram was generated out of a study we did, which had 50 service providers, 37 vendors and suppliers, and multiple people from each of those organizations. So it's a pretty broad survey. It is, I think, about kind of a year old now, so maybe the market has moved a little bit, but I think it's still representative of how people perceive SD-WAN. And I think I would go in the kind of, it's both, and it depends how you engage with SD-WAN and how you choose as a service provider to make it either work for you or to compete with people who can do more agile delivery over the top. So this is maybe the scene for what SD-WAN is. In order to put some kind of context around what we're going to talk about, we need to define some terms, and the way we've chosen to define this is to borrow terminology from the data center and to use the overlay and underlay terminology. I think the definitions here are pretty standard. But I guess if we said overlay underlay, would everyone in the room understand what that meant? Yeah, pretty much broad nodding. Again, to be completely to get a completely generalized definition of overlay underlay, again, I think is a bit of a fool's errand, because there are so many different ways you could view what is an overlay and what is an underlay. But this is a pretty good starter definition, and it's what we're going to use as we talk about SD-WAN as we go through this session. So, what is an SD-WAN? Are there any SD-WAN vendors out there? Couple maybe. So do you feel like if I said what is an SD-WAN, you could write say you're talking to your partner over dinner and you want to say, this is what an SD-WAN service is, I've got to tell you about this stuff. Do you feel like you'd actually really get there, or do you feel like it's a bit sort of nebulous and a bit woolly and a bit, I think kind of it has been up until now that, if you look at the things that are in an SD-WAN, well, it's got policy-based routing. Well, policy-based routing was a thing kind of 10 years ago. It's got overlays. Well, overlays have been around for a little while. Well, it's got IPsec. Well, IPsec has been around for a while. So there's a lot of components which have been around, for a while. And I think it's a bit like a smartphone. So today we know what a smartphone is. Somebody says they've got a new smartphone. You kind of know what they've got, and that's been kind of driven by the market. And almost, there's been no standards body around it, but people know what a smartphone is. And so I guess what we're trying to do here is try and take those various constructs which have been around for a while and put them into something which we can identify off the bat as, that's an SD-WAN service. I know what it is. I know what it's going to give me. So we'll spend a little while just looking at that. So what is an SD-WAN service? It's kind of four, I suppose, kind of basic tenets of what it is. Firstly, it's a specific application of SDN to WAN services. So again, nothing new here, but it's putting that SDN in places to make really good decisions. I remember being at the ONS in 2013, and there being a slew of papers saying that if you took if you narrowed down the number of places where you deployed SDN to just a few key decision points, you could get 90 to 95% of the benefit of having SD-WAN globally in a network, but radically improving reducing the number of places you had to touch the network. And that kind of really stuck with me. And I think maybe that's the first time I got, I suppose, an introduction to what has now become SD-WAN. But this same kind of principle, you put the decision-making point at the key points where it's going to make the most impact, and then run it over the rest of the network. It is a virtual overlay. So again, that concept of I've got some underlay tunnels and I'm making smart decisions about how to make best use of that resource. I'm getting a virtual overlay. It operates over existing existing networks. Doesn't stop you from adding to those existing networks over time or managing those existing networks, but it operates over existing networks, so you can be turned up to date. Again, one use case that I've seen talked about quite a lot is that reducing that time to having a customer up and live, and using an existing internet connection to get somebody up on a service quickly, because again, from experience, I think as alluded to before, one thing we see is churn for CSPs, for customers who have to wait too long to get a service up and running. If it takes you 2 weeks to get a quote back because you have to go and dig in 10 Visio files to find out what fiber goes to nearish where the customer is, and then you have to phone up someone else to find out where exactly it goes because it's out of date. That's too long. If I get an SD-WAN solution and they can come back with a quote in a day because they know they can get me up and running, and then they can do all this stuff in the background, then that kind of gives you that kind of first mover advantage. So it can use existing networks in lots of different ways. And it has no interaction with the underlying network. I'll be honest, this is the one I have the most outright difficulty with, because I think to get the best solution possible, you probably do want to understand a little bit of what's happening underneath, but you're not dependent on understanding that, and we'll see why in a couple of slides time. So does everyone feel like they have a sense of what an SD-WAN service might be? Kind of, maybe, yeah, a little bit. So let's look at some fundamental capabilities. So think about these maybe as your smartphone functions. Well, I get a smartphone, this is what I expect to see on it from day one. The first thing is secure IP-based virtual overlay networks. So IPsec, giving you that security between the endpoints for all of the flows in your entire SD-WAN solution. That's pretty much kind of a start point for every SD-WAN solution. As I kind of said before, that transport independence. So I'm going to be able to run this SD-WAN wherever I choose to put my endpoint of that service, and it's going to work because I don't have to worry about what I'm deploying it on top of. I can just make it work, and I can route over whatever the infrastructure is there. The next kind of few are sort of codependent, but we've broken them out separately, and I'll speak to each one of them separately. So the first one is service assurance of SD-WAN tunnels. So this is where I sit, and as an SD-WAN application, I measure the quality of service, maybe the quality of experience, depending on what type of traffic it is, of the traffic that's going over those underlay tunnels, so that I know that any smart placement decisions that I've made are still smart. So a smart decision is only as smart as the current status of the network that you're running on top of. And to be able to make sure that you're still making the right decision, you're still giving the customer the right advice on how to route that traffic, you need to be measuring it. You need to be doing that kind of real-time assurance. Because you want to then do the next bullet, which is to do application-driven packet forwarding. You want to be able to say, look, for these applications, this is going to be the right underlay for me to route that tunnel on top of. But for these applications, we can put it on the internet. It doesn't matter. All that corporate HTTP traffic, we'll put it straight onto the internet, onto that internet tunnel, and nobody will notice. But for those really important Skype calls, for those VP broadcasts, we'll put that on something where it really does matter. So to make that kind of application-driven, and it also links into the policy-based application forwarding as well. So maybe if we know that, for example, we're going to be doing bulk data transfers, bulk backups of our entire system, we may want to fine-tune that application-driven packet forwarding. So to use the two in concert and make really smart decisions, and then to measure, to know that, do you know what, today, normally we get a slack spot in our usage, but today, for some other reason, that isn't occurring. Let's just back off from that policy for now, and let's go to our normal daytime running policy and move to that once we know that actually we are seeing that difference in behaviour. And again, maybe that's where you listen to the underlay tunnels a little bit, but to be able to make those kind of smart decisions. High availability using multiple WANs, so to make sure that you're always able to communicate, to be able to distribute your traffic. Again, this isn't really rocket science. Dual-homed IPVPNs have been a thing for as long as I've been looking at IPVPNs, but to put that over not just a single service provider's infrastructure, but to be able to distribute that across multiple different and not just geo-independent, but service provider independent routes is a real differentiator for SD-WAN, and it's something which is really important. So we're on the left-hand side now. Service automation, centralized management. There's a couple of kind of big bullets there. So first one, zero-touch provisioning. Because it's an SDN-based solution, we get all the benefit of being able to ship a device, plug it in, install it, have it announce, and then have it be configured in real time. So you get that whole zero-touch cycle with SD-WAN. Again, nothing particularly new in that, but it's there in SD-WAN, and it is a key part of that service, that ability to plug in and have it turn up and switch on and work. That's really important. And also centralized policy management, to give you that ability to make those kind of centralized decisions, to have the view of not just a piece of the network or one leg of the network, but the whole SD-WAN service, and to treat it as a single whole, and to be able to make better, smarter decisions, because rather than seeing a little piece, I see everything. That's a really important part of SD-WAN. And now finally on this slide, we get to the optional stuff. Again, it's the stuff that kind of helps you deliver maybe better, different services. And there's a lot of kind of terms in here, and some of them kind of compete with each other. So I'm kind of conscious that deduplication and forward error correction are kind of somewhat competing use cases here, but they're all part of giving you that flexibility that you need for an SD-WAN solution, and these are the things then you start to get into differentiation around. So let's see how this fits in with the LSO reference architecture. Oh, there's a build I didn't know about there. The first thing is, when we look at a service, and this is true of all services within MEF, we look at the service as how it's experienced by the customer. And the place where the customer experiences it is this thing here called the UNI, the user to network interface. Who understands that term? Okay, a few of you. Okay, so it's not completely foreign language. This is really important. This is what I think is the most important part of the way MEF defines services, because rather than get into the nitty-gritty of how it's implemented, we look at actually how is it experienced by the customer. What do they see? What do they feel? What levers can they pull? And the UNI is always a place where you get that experience. The other thing that we define then as part of this this overlay network is a tunnel virtual connection, and this is our connection, our set of overlay tunnels which overlay the underlay, sort of obviously. But interconnect the UNIs. And these are things down which we direct traffic, we do the application-based stuff. And this is how we would see the service from the customer perspective. So when he orders it, and when it's ordered into the service orchestrator, it would be expressed in these terms. So I want a 3-site SD-WAN service between these 3 locations, and with these policies, or with these for these types of traffic. That's how it would be expressed. In the next slide then, we kind of look at putting some terminology around what are the components which are used to deliver that service. So this is, if you like, the internals of what's happening within that service orchestrator and what it's configuring down into the SD-WAN controller to actually enable that service, to actually really go turn it up. And there's a few kind of important terms here. Firstly, we define an SD-WAN edge. So this is the edge of where the SD-WAN service is. This is the place where you're going to do the application-based forwarding, where you're going to enforce the policies which you defined in the service. So that's the literal edge of the SD-WAN service. We then define an SD-WAN gateway. An SD-WAN gateway is a place where we perform interconnect between an SD-WAN service and a non-SD-WAN service. So again, it's just a term for a functional box, but it gives us a reference point for how we're going to work with SD-WAN services. We define an SD-WAN controller, effectively an SDN controller, but specialized to SD-WAN as an SD-WAN domain controller. And this is the thing which is going to manage all of the edges and all of the gateways, and give us that kind of control operation. We then define a service orchestrator to give us that kind of end-to-end view, to allow us to put processes in place, to allow us to build in reaction to what's happening in the SD-WAN, maybe what's happening in the network, to join information together. So you can think about the service orchestrator starting to have access to AI and data lakes down the line and start to be able to make really good, holistic, learned decisions about behaviors and about how the SD-WAN service is performing. And then finally, and by no means least, the subscriber web portal, which is where the customer is going to define how they want to make use of that SD-WAN service that they've got, how they want to pull the levers that they've been given as a part of that SD-WAN service, and how they want to configure it. And again, this is where I think you're going to see differences between service providers as to what are the things they want to offer their customers and the levers they want to allow them to pull. And again, going back to is this a threat or not? This could also be a place where you could go direct to an enterprise IT department. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a service provider providing it inside out, but it could be provided direct to an enterprise outside in, over the top. So that portal doesn't have to be just to see a service provider portal. It could be a direct to enterprise portal and giving you direct access, which I think is the interesting thing about SD-WAN. There's nothing here which says that these edge points have to be provided by a service provider. They could be provided to an enterprise direct. So again, it's an interesting kind of straddling use case. So how do the service components fit into the MEF LSO architecture? Well, I hope you can see that they line up pretty well. Perhaps no surprise that we've made that happen, but it just bears kind of reiterating. So the customer, so as Rami kind of excellently pointed out, these are the reference points for the MEF LSO, and they support a number of different use cases. So what we're doing in this work is now defining this set of SD-WAN use cases which apply to each of these reference points. So Allegro is our real-time interface, as Rami pointed out, for in the MEF LSO architecture. And what we do in SD-WAN now is define what are those real-time data feeds and push buttons going to look like for a customer who has an SD-WAN service. Likewise, we're going to look at what does it mean at Legato to order from the BSS layer down an SD-WAN service? How would we codify that into, for example, ONAP using the service ordering API from the TMF? How would some of that look? Equally, what does it look like to go from the orchestrator down into the SD-WAN controller, the Presto reference point, so we can work on a bunch of Presto use cases and API implementations. And equally, at the Adagio level as well, down from the controller down into the actual equipment, and we can look to get standardization there. One of the things as kind of preparing for this, I kind of remembered was that SD-WAN kind of emerged onto the scene as its own kind of vertical, and we would be working with a couple of service providers and building an LSO compliant architecture, and then kind of SD-WAN came along as this whole other kind of stovepipe, and it was kind of, to be honest, it was slightly annoying because we had this nice architecture, everything kind of worked and kind of slotted together, and all of a sudden we had a new thing over here. So one of the upshots of this work should be that rather than being a separate thing in its own silo, which has kind of a black box type of architecture, we can get to much more integrated solutions. And again, we can work with service providers, and in fact, and service providers can work themselves on kind of introduction of SD-WAN as a service, and hopefully get a much more simple migratory path rather than feeling they have to go through a whole other kind of upcycle of an existing solution, and actually figure out how you join it together. Hopefully this should enable a much more kind of gradual migration to end state SD-WAN services. So let's take a look at some use cases. Again, these are examples. They're by no means all of the use cases we're going to cover, but again, these 4 use cases start to show some interesting differences between how you can deploy SD-WAN. So the first use case is perhaps the simplest one to grapple with, and it's where we have 2 SD-WAN edge points with and two underlays. One underlay being an existing MPLS VPN, another one being a backup internet service, and allows us to think about how do we manage traffic onto that backup? Do we use it as a pure backup for when there's congestion over the main link, or do you proactively put policies in place which push data out onto that internet connection without there having to be congestion on the main service? So it gives you, even within this simple use case with just two connections and two endpoints, there's a wide range of ways that you could stand this up and you could configure this to operate. But this is probably the simplest use case to think about. So a second use case would look more like this, where we're looking at kind of WAN resiliency, and we're trying to kind of hedge our bets a little bit and say that, look, let's spread our service across two providers. We want to make sure that we've got resiliency. If one connection goes down, we can swap across to another one. In this particular example, we're looking at two internet-based connections, but you could swap those out for two carrier Ethernet direct connections, and you'd have the same kind of effect, but with a different type of service. And again, this gives you the option: do I just go over one, or do I go over the other, or do I spread and adjust if I see an issue? Do I size it so that actually I could put all of my traffic over one and spread it in normal mode over two, but know that if one goes down, I've still got enough capacity? So again, there's a lot of kind of specification issues around how you would sell that SD-WAN service. And again, this could look much more like an enterprise SD-WAN service, where maybe the enterprise is buying their own direct connections from two different service providers, but managing it at the edge using an SD-WAN solution, and managing it over the top. This third example now starts to look at, well, what if we have virtual functions? Because actually one of the big things about SD-WAN is that there are a bunch of ENFs. I'm probably telling you stuff you already know, but there is a very strong part of the SD-WAN solution, which is that we have these virtual CPE components, and we can deploy VNFs onto them and turn things up, turn things down, and provide different levels and types of service. But again, the architecture that we put in place and the terminology that we put in place doesn't change. So whether that edge point, that SD-WAN edge, is a virtual edge point or a physical edge point, it's the same terminology, but a different implementation. And it's up to a service provider whether they choose to expose any of that or not. But the way we would define the service at Legato would generally hide that as an implementation detail. So that might come out in, how quickly is it for me to deploy this? It may come out in some other measurable or specifiable metric, but it's not going to be front and center. You're not going to say, well, this is a VNF solution, because typically most people aren't going to be too bothered about it, whether it is or not. You may find some IT departments that really want to know, but in the general case, it's the functionality of the SD-WAN that's important, rather than the specifics of exactly how it's been implemented, providing you get what you want from the service. And then the final one looks at, well, okay, maybe we can put the edge directly into the cloud. Maybe we can put the edge in an Amazon or a Google or a Microsoft cloud server, and put it directly there, because actually that's where my stuff is. That's, as an enterprise, that's where I've put my IT. And I want it to be directly there. So my SD-WAN edge now not only encompasses my sites, my physical sites, but also my virtual sites in the cloud, and I put it directly into that cloud infrastructure. And now I can manage my traffic from that virtual resource, and I can start to direct it, and I can even, in simple things, I can start to measure how it's performing, and I can start to make those kind of smart decisions. So SD-WAN allows for this kind of a service to be defined as well, for us to get to this kind of an end state where we're reaching out and deploying directly into that cloud infrastructure and architecture. So there are a number of ways to get engaged, and I would encourage and in fact invite everyone in this room to get engaged, because the more people who work on this, the better it's going to be. We have got a bunch of SD-WAN vendors working with us at the moment. I think we made a list, and we kind of decided there are about 20 people worthwhile targeting, and we've got kind of at least 10 or 11 out of that list, and most of the major guys as well. So we've got all the right heads in the room thinking about this. But you know, the more people who get involved in this, the more right it will be when it comes out first time. We have the white paper. The white paper's done. You can go and download that, and you know, please read it. It's very well written. It's a really nicely laid out piece of work. But now we're doing some additional work. So starting with the middle, because that's what sits directly under my responsibility, we're working on technical specifications. We're working very hard on technical specifications. It's in our wiki. It's being worked on probably right now as I speak. And it's open to anyone who's a MEF member to get involved and to contribute and to drive the work forward, because we see this as being, you know, really significant. Something that really has to be defined within the MEF. In parallel to that, there is an implementation project. Again, we have, I think, 5 or 6 of those SD-WAN vendors in the MEFnet lab, deploying their solutions and working on interop between those solutions, making sure they can fit together, looking at how we can deploy SD-WAN services that straddle multiple vendors. So this is being actively worked today. I don't think there's a checkpoint in our Athens meeting in April, but there certainly will be one in Nashville. I think there's going to be one in Nashville. Yeah, Pascal's nodding at me. So we will have a checkpoint there of how that work is going. And clearly, a MEF 18 at the end of the year, the big kind of showcase, there'll be time to look at that and see how far we've come in that 6 months. We have a market education project as well to get the message out, to say that, look, this needs to be solved. We think like we've got an answer. We think it makes sense. We think enough service providers think it makes sense. But we want to get the message out there. And so really, I'll kind of leave you on this kind of call to arms. Yeah, MEF is doing a lot of experimental work. We are, you know, pushing the boundaries on each of these reference points, coming up with API implementations, and then pushing those back into specifications. Again, the more people we have working on this, the better we can make that process, the faster we can move it forward, and just the better work that will come out at the end of it. We have you know, a bunch of different orchestration solutions which are deployed, a bunch of different vendor products which are deployed underneath those orchestration solutions. But the more people who collaborate in this space, the better it's ultimately going to be, and the more we're going to learn as an industry. So that's all I had for today. I think I've got 2 minutes and 40 seconds of questions. So please.
All right, so, it's too loud. Let me whisper. So my question, a couple of questions, I'll make it quick. So first of all, I mean, like, is the product and offer in the scope of the MEF or not?
So the actual product is sold to the customer?
Yes.
Yeah.
Inside the scope of the MEF?
So, yes, it will be.
All it says is.
Yeah, so the product as ordered by the let me go back. Here we go. Cantata is the product ordering interface. Yeah, so it's in scope.
The second question is, who is proceeding the order?
Who's receiving the order? So again, it depends whether this is service provider offered or whether it's being offered directly to an enterprise. So if it's service provider offered, that would go into a BSS in a service provider.
Yeah, so then the question is, why the TM forum send the order to the service orchestrator? Because are they expecting service orchestrator is going to processing the order?
So I think this, yeah, you know, I've been asked that a couple of times internally in the last month. I think it's an unfortunate choice of terminology. So I think that there is a service order interface into the service orchestrator, but it's not an ordering interface. It's ordering a service. So if you look at TMF 640 and TMF 641, they do kind of the same thing, but they've chosen to call them different things. So whereas 640, I think, called it service provisioning, 641 calls it service ordering. But really what it's doing is allowing you to group multiple service requests into one big service order. But they've called it ordering, which I admit is confusing.
Thank you.
But luckily it's not my mistake.
Very good clarification, thank you. But continue. Service Australia is handling the customer-facing services, or together with the resource-facing customer service here? Are they handling both of them?
Again, it's a terminology debate, but what would be exposed here would be the kind of the top level service. So if you borrow SID language, it would be the customer facing service that would be exposed here. Yes. But then that could obviously be bundled into multiple of these could be bundled into one product offer here.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, it's a kind of a layering.
How it translate from the customer-facing service to the resource-facing services inside?
I think as Rami kind of pointed out, we talk about having a catalog within the service orchestrator, and there would be a decomposition process, either static or dynamic, but broadly defined within that catalog to say this top-level service has these components, and then you get into figuring out which of them are applicable to the conditions of the customer.
I saw this more like translation other than decomposing. Decomposing means you have end-to-end, you can decompose to the domain. Each domain, then you can decompose, but customer facing, you have to translate.
Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of work which has to be done once you receive that initial service order. Even to be able to answer serviceability queries, you have to be able to understand how you're going to implement it, or even maybe come back with the implementation options. So yeah, I agree, it's not a simple kind of turn the handle, get the answer. It's what are the options? What are your initial conditions? Where are you asking for it? What have I got there to offer it to you on before I can then get back to you and say maybe these are the options.
All right. My last question. Thank you. Very, very, very detailed. The last question is about if the TM forum send the order or catalog, whatever, to this ONAP, and who is going to handle that for what purpose? I haven't seen anything in the ONAP can proceed those information yet. Do you have any idea?
So ONAP does have a catalog within it. I think again, it's kind of an active area of debate as to how you expose that catalog northbound and how it's accessed. So there's a and this is one of the committees where MEF and ONAP are working together to kind of work through this. So there's a current proposition from Orange around how you use TMF 641 to access the services from the catalog and then to provision them in the service orchestrator. But yeah, I agree, and I was on a call today where people said, well, when do you use the service catalog API versus the service ordering API? And I think there's still a bunch of work to do to try and normalize that out. But yeah, great set of questions.
Right. I understand the API was written on the wiki page. That's true. So I'm curious about how the internal ONAP can handle that. That's my. But anyway, I haven't seen that happen yet. But anyway.
Sure.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, I think I'm free. Thank you.